today we're talking about poltergeists. And who says poltergeist? Who says poltergeist? I think it's poltergeist.
It is.
Yes, because it's German. Yeah. So, yes. And has anyone ever had any poltergeist activity?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Is that another word for ghost?
Yeah.
Yeah. Noisy ghost. Yeah, that's what. Yeah, that's what.
We have it all the time.
No, turn it on.
Yes, well, our house.
Pesky ghosts.
I'm going to be.
We have it at my place all the time.
I'm going to be a noisy ghost, I tell you. So polter is noisy or to knock, and geist is spirit, ghost. The interesting thing about poltergeist experiences, they can start, boom, out of the blue, and they can end just as abruptly. And they can last several hours, several months, and in some of the cases I'm going to talk about several years, which is frustrating as hell. I could imagine what it would be like for people who are got all these noises, things that disappear, you know, glasses being thrown across the room, all this sort of stuff. So yeah, that would be very disruptive. So some of the activity, the spontaneous movements or breakage of objects, like I said, thrown across the room, appearance or disappearance of objects. Interestingly, a lot of people who report close encounters report that as well, that things disappear, don't always reappear, or they find them months later exactly where they disappeared from, which is very interesting. Close encounters with extraterrestrials, that is. And because there's quite a few parallels in the paranormal field to the UFO field, because the UFO field is, you know, intertwined, as you know, some of you know, with a lot of paranormal activity. Rain of stones and bricks and dirt and other small objects. Spontaneous fires, there's fire poltergeists, which I'll talk about as well. Lights turning on and off spontaneously. Electronic disturbances, again, with people who report close encounters, that's quite common. Even Uri Geller, he had lots of problems with wearing a watch. I think he went through about 11 watches or something when he was a kid. His father would bought him a watch, and then it either stopped working or something. He was at school, and then it would go backwards, and he had to keep replacing his watch. In fact, Damien Knott, those of you in the UFO community know about Damien, who's had a lot of UFO experiences, filmed a lot of UFOs, I should say, and had some strange paranormal experiences. He is forever, what did he say the other day, how many 40-something phones he's been through, and goodness knows how many computers, and there was something else. And I thought, my God, that must cost a fortune. Yeah. You know, really. Yeah. And I got a text from him 2 days ago, and it's yet another phone number. There's a question about that, is whether it's kinetic energy from them, and that comes into the poltergeist experiences too. But there are cases where it's not, so we'll talk about that. Assaulting people and animals, like they hit, bite, or they sexually assault. That comes up also with the jinn, which I've spoken about before, with the Islamic talking about the jinn, yeah, how assaulting people and animals, sexually assault them, and some of the jinn, the beings made from smokeless fire, which also relates to fire poltergeist as well. Those beings in the Islamic tradition can cause a lot of havoc, just like poltergeists. Loud noises, shrieks and rappings. We have a front doorbell that keeps going off anytime. I think we've thought that it's to do with someone else using another system in the area like ours. Could be. I'm just putting it down to that, okay? But it goes off any time during the day and there's no one there. Anyway, apparitions, vile smell. Has anyone ever walked into an area and go, like in your home, and go, what's that vile smell? Anybody? Yeah? There was a lady who called me late last year. She had lived on some flat area on top of Toowoomba, and she said there was this vile smell. She'd seen a UFO. The next day she could smell this vile smell. She couldn't tell where it was coming from. It seemed to emanate from curtains, through the floor, through the wall, and she said she had someone check it and there was no cracks in the foundations, nothing like that. it just stayed. And her daughter was adult daughter was living in the house at the time, and they just could not find the origins of that vile smell. And I have heard of some people who've reported close encounters have that as well. So, and water leaks, strange water leaks that they, puddles of water are found, but no origin. Yeah. So the difference between hauntings and poltergeists is hauntings are directly related to places, but poltergeists seem to be directly related to people. So we'll just talk a bit more about that. Some of the skeptical explanations are that they're caused from water turbulence, mechanical vibrations, seismic activity, and bald lightning. These are all to explain how things can be floating across the room or thrown across the room, and yet those people say, well, there is no earthquake, there's no seismic activity, there's nothing going on, no vibrations. But this is a skeptical explanation of what it is, which really have no basis in any foundation. The first poltergeist reported in Germany in 856 AD. Reportedly, the poltergeist threw rocks and ignited fires in an attempt to harm a German family. That was in a very old book that I came across. So it's obviously, and this is recorded, so obviously it exists throughout our history. Now this is a case I wanted to talk about. It's very interesting, and apparently it was a big case. It was in the newspapers. The media were hanging outside the house, trying to, like paranormal paparazzi, hanging around outside trying to get a story. But what happened was it involved this girl, Shirley Hitchings, I think it is, and all these strange experiences that were happening in the house. Bangings and knockings and things being thrown through the air, etc. Now, this is her mum outside one of the old houses. This is when they were at a seance. Now, I think this, you can't see it probably from back there. This is Shirley, and this is her dad, and this is someone who worked with her father, and he organised to have a seance to see if they could communicate with the poltergeist, see what the heck was going on. So this is the sort of building that they lived in. Their particular house, I couldn't see it in that image, but it might have been one way down the end there. But that was the sort of situation that they were living in. Very old, probably a lot of history in the place. Who knows what went on there. That's Shirley herself at age 12, better photo. So the poltergeist activity began when Shirley found an ornate silver key. This is not it, I just put that up there, on her bed. And she picked it up. She said, that's really interesting, what is that? So she went to ask her father, who at the time happened to be bathing her mum because her mum wasn't well at the time. So, and she's saying, Dad, what is this? What is it? So I'll just put it on the shelf, I'll have a look at it later, which he eventually did. And no one could find anything in the home that it actually fitted into at all. So now what went on from there was the old Bobby, hey? What went on from there was things started to happen, knockings on the wall like this, rapping sounds from the wall.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, things being thrown across the room, floated across the room, all sorts of strange things like that. So it went on and on and on and on, and eventually the police got involved, and they came in, and they, after an investigation, said it's all a hoax.
Oh.
Of course they would.
Yeah.
So there's just, we can't, it's 1956 for goodness sake, let's think about that, right? So they said, no, it must be a hoax because we can't find any reason why this is going on. They must be playing playing some sort of game. Anyway, the family involved, they found out about this man, Harold Chibbett, who was a paranormal investigator. Well, he was an investigator of sorts. He was just someone who was really interested in the paranormal, okay? And he made it his business when things like this would come up, he would go and he would talk to the people involved. Anyway, so he came onto the scene about 6 weeks after Shirley found the key. He basically lived in their home on and off for ages. He'd just come in with his sleeping bag and his pillow and a notebook to document everything, and he was basically part of the furniture for a long time. And he recorded all the events that happened in that home. Okay, now those books, those notebooks, there's quite a few of them. I think there was about 40 I was reading, something like that, just full of everything that was going on. Now you can go onto YouTube. They've done a podcast. You can go onto and look up Battersea Poltergeist podcast, and I think there's about 10 series, and you can listen to it. And a lot of the information is from Shirley, but also from his documented notes. Anyway, after a long time, Shirley decided she was going to nickname the poltergeist Donald, as you do. And communications were established with the taps on the wall. So one tap was no, and 2 taps meant yes. And so they're asking a lot of questions. Who are you? What are you doing here? What do you want, etc. One question was, do you want to hurt Shirley? No. There's a couple other questions, but it didn't seem to come across as anything malevolent, to put it that way. Just damn annoying, okay? Now I've got this one here because this isn't Shirley, but on one occasion, because it was a 2-story place where they lived in, and on one occasion, because Shirley's brother thought that she was doing it all, he thought she was hoaxing it, and on one occasion she's calling out to him from upstairs in her room, and he goes up the stairs thinking, oh, what's she up to now? Opens the door, goes in, and she levitates off the bed 6 inches. So she couldn't have done that by herself. Mm-hmm. So that sort of convinced him that maybe she's not actually hoaxing this after all. And he was a bit dirty on Shirley because he found out when he was 18 that he was actually adopted and he didn't know. So he was pretty upset about that. And he sort of removed himself from the situation. But that's the family. This is, forgotten, I think it was John was his name, the adopted son, Shirley, and the mother and father. Now the interesting thing was, and I just find this so curious, that the father actually became so unwell physically and psychologically that he had to stop work because of what was going on in the house. The mother, when the poltergeist activity actually stopped 12 years later, she became despondent because the poltergeist was no longer around, and she'd actually grown fond of Donald, which is very strange, very, very strange, very interesting. But anyway, so they were trying. Oh, here we are. Now this is Shirley. She's now 80, and this is off a clip of a video, a British morning show that I was watching where she was talking about it. But she talked about objects floating across the room, gently placed on the floor. Okay, which, if you're, and I'll show you some clips soon, but if you, the old-fashioned put a fishing line on it and pull it like this and no one will see it, right, if you're trying to do a hoax. Well, when things are gently placed on the floor, that's, it's impossible to do that sort of thing. One time, her father's slippers that were always kept near the fireplace, they actually walked across the room in a disembodied state, which is very interesting. Yeah. Well, could you imagine just sitting there and just watching Ron's shoes just walk across there, except there's no Ron in them? Like, what's that about? Yeah. So there was this huge media fuss about the whole thing for a while, and the family got a bit sick of it, and they'd opened the door and they're, pounded by the media. So they decided the only way to get rid of them is to let them come in, do their story, and get away. So they did. They let the media in, and they asked their own questions, etc. Are you intent on hurting Shirley? Are you leaving soon? Or those sorts of things. Will you be around a while? And all that sort of stuff. Anyway. But it didn't go away. They didn't go away because it went on for so long. Now, after a while, they found out, they tried to do this letter pointing, and I'm thinking that this is all they said, that information was revealed through pointing of letters, and I'm thinking it might have been a Ouija board, but it was a homemade, set up your letters and on the thing. And that was the idea of that Chibbit man, to try and establish some sort of communication. Anyway, so they supposedly, Donald turns out to be, or claimed he was the son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. And he died in 1795. Now, they had a handwriting expert who came in as well, because there were over 4,000 letters written, okay, by this Donald over a 12-year period. And so they did this handwriting analysis with Shirley's writing and with Donald's writing, okay. These letters would just be found. There was no one there being channeling it or being possessed to write it, nothing like that. They would just be found in the home. They found that this one had some French words in it, and sometimes they were some of the words were misspelled. But one handwriting expert said, there's a tendency towards backwards lean, which is what Shirley's is as well. So they thought that she's doing all this, right? Now she's 12, so then from 12 to 22, that's when you're pulling off a hoax, 12 years is a very long time to keep hoaxing. We sort of looked at this stuff in the 90s when we were looking at alien abduction experiences. How do you pull off a hoax around someone's life for so long? Like, the amount of mental intrigue and keeping things straight in your mind to keep that going is not always that easy as what people think. Anyway, fires began breaking out in the house too, and on one occasion the father actually caught fire, and he got a severe burn. So he went to the doctor, and curiously, in the middle of the burn, which was in his middle, the doctor found evidence of a claw mark, and no one actually knew how that actually got there. So I don't know what that means, but it was a claw mark, a clawing, I should say, not a mark, a clawing wound. I'll get it right. Yeah. Did anyone tune into the Paramook online conference just a couple of weeks ago? No. Okay. Well, it was hosted by the Parapsychological Foundation. They actually had Beth Darlington, who was in Sydney, moved to the UK, talking about alternative explanations for paranormal experiences. But it was this case and another one, which I was really interested in, another one was in South America. But I have to tell you, it was really difficult listening to this gentleman over an hour talking about this, because English was not his first language, and he was obviously reading English, and it was very hard for him to understand. You got to hang in there and listen. But anyway, so he's from Tokyo, Japan, from the Institute for Informatics of Consciousness, School of Information and Communication, and he presented a case which was really interesting. Oh, sorry, not this is the case in Paraguay, sorry. So this happened between 1969 and 1972 in South America, up here, Paraguay, and it was a poltergeist that was in a couple of homes. So here's this property, okay, there's a house here with an older lady living there, tomato field here, the house of the Okabe family, and another smaller house. So it wasn't very clear who owned it. Was it one parcel or whatever? I'm not really sure. But this and this house are interconnected. So the story is that in the Okabe house, a lot of the poltergeist activity was happening, and they found that when small stones were flying in the dining room of another building, things on the first floor of this building started moving upstairs. And I'm talking big stuff, big tyres, big timber beams, bicycle chains, things like that, okay? And they couldn't figure out how on earth that was happening. So this is the size of the tyre. This one's got a chain on it with a lock, okay? And so all these heavy things were fixed by chain on the first floor. And it says up here, however, tyres moved to the second floor from the first floor, even though they were fixed by chain. And they still couldn't figure out how on earth this was going on. And this is an example of what was disappearing. So there's a bicycle, it's a stone from outside, a big stone, a railing, gas cylinder, tyre up here, and so I thought, well, we'll track it down, we'll follow it, and we'll tie some string onto it and see what happens, because it kept happening over and over and over again. Similar things were being moved all the time. So they tied a long piece of string onto the objects, which continued to move upwards, and they would go, no one would see them go up, things would go upstairs unseen, okay? They didn't know how it was happening. The threads were hanging down through a few millimetres of the planking on the floor. Nakagawa repeated this test, but the thread was always hanging down through the gap in the ceiling planks down here. So they have these objects on the bottom floor, put a long piece of string on it, they find it upstairs with the string hanging off of it through the plank on the floor planks. Couldn't figure out how it was happening, but they just knew it was. There was no explanation, etc., etc. Now in the other house, where the older lady was living, furniture and things were being moved out of the house, passing through these slits. Same thing. I'm guessing they had string on it. It was, I have to say, it was really hard to understand this man. So I had to hang in there. I got as much out of it as what I could. And they couldn't explain how that happened. Now the thing that I find really interesting and how this relates to the UFO subject is that people reported seeing UFOs and they would disappear into a mountain, or they'd disappear into the ground. I don't know how many times I could tell you over the years that people say, I saw this thing that was coming close to the ground, I'm waiting for the sound of the crash. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It just disappeared into the ground. I think you'd say the same thing, Glenys. People reported that to you too. So there's something really weird going on there. What it is, I don't know, but it's very interesting. Okay, so has anyone got this book, Australian Poltergeist?
No.
Tony Healy and Paul Cropper investigated a lot of poltergeists. In the book, I think they've got 11 Australian stories. I am going to show a clip later, after we have afternoon tea, of Paul, because we hosted him here in Brisbane, talking about fire poltergeists that he investigated overseas. But before that, so this is subtitled The Stone Throwing Spook of Humpty Doo and Many Other Cases. And this is a very strange case. This is the house in Northern Territory in 1998, where there were strange things going on. There was a rain of stones would come down from the ceiling. There were objects that were thrown across the place. This is a collection of some of the knives. There's also a spanner, batteries, there's a glass. These are things that would be found, and some of the smaller stones. And Paul himself, also writing would appear on the wall that says, "Tonight die." Okay, yeah. So you probably can't see it down the back, but it's sort of written in a scrawly writing. There was this one where it says "car" is spelt out in small stones as well. This is Paul. He's under this fan, probably wondering, could they have put those stones on top of the fan blades before the actual fan was turned on, But apparently I think that they actually fell straight down, so that doesn't sort of fit the whole idea. And this is a news report that I'll play of an event. People went up there and they investigated the case, and they're talking about the heat signatures they found on some of the objects that were thrown across the room.
You're looking at a thermal image of me.
It's a bit
The
better.
blackest parts of the picture are the coldest parts of my face, and the hottest parts of my face appear white. Now, we've brought this heat-seeking camera along to try and catch out humans. This is how it works. If I pick up this brush, hold it for a couple of seconds, and then throw it down, we can see that someone has touched the object. Before we even had our cameras set up, things started flying. James Petch.
I don't know, it just bounced. It bounced off here, somewhere. I don't know. There's no way it could have come in the window because of the fly screen.
So where did that bit of glass come from? It was the flying glass which baffled our thermal camera operator, Brendan Gowdy.
What we're looking at is thermal images taken approximately every 2 to 3 seconds. And you'll see the heat is dissipating. I mean, you can see an overall picture here, how quickly the heat's dissipating.
On the pieces of glass, Gowdy's camera picked up a rapidly fading and uniform heat reading. There was never any unevenness caused by fingerprints, and this piece was far too big to uniformly heat up in your hand.
I was baffled. I mean, if I had to say something, I'd say it was a bit like a microwave. You know, something put a film of energy over the top of it, and that energy is what we actually witnessed disappearing before our eyes, or before our thermal eyes, if you like. Yeah, that was difficult to explain.
Brendan was also witness to a particularly violent incident. He was the only person in the house when this happened.
Whoa! What the?
A live bullet ricocheted onto the carpet. In slow motion, it appears to have come from the ceiling, then bounced off the furniture. We taped it from 2 angles.
Whoa! What the? Once again, no thermal fingerprints on it. Nothing that leads you to believe it was thrown by human, or had human contact. Yes, you could explain if they had a pair of tongs and things like that, but it wasn't the case. Yeah, nobody in the room once again.
Brendan, looking at this from your scientific point of view, what in your mind could have done to those objects what was done?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know what. From a scientific point of view, I have no explanation.
Interesting, hey? No explanation as to how that actually happened.
What causes poltergeists? Well, there's a couple of theories. One is that spirits of the dead, spirits. The spirits are doing this. Or demons. A common explanation. Psychokinesis. Okay, that is the supposed ability of some people to be able to move objects by the force of their mind. Totally not proven, but some people use that as what they believe is causing poltergeist phenomena. It's somebody actually, consciously or unconsciously, causing this thing to happen. Or even a mixture of the above. What we do know, and it's certainly backed up in the stuff that I've been involved with, it usually involves young kids, either a young girl or a young boy, more often than not a young girl, generally between the age of 11 and 13. A common thread seems to be the focus of it. Remember, poltergeists are about people. Often there's a focused person that things seem to happen more often around. Unlike the Steven Spielberg movie, which I think it was caused by the Indian graveyard. Never actually found one of them. But it does seem to focus around people. And I talked about psychokinesis, but in a lot of the literature about poltergeists, the explanation proposed is that this young person somehow, because of inner conflict, things hidden, things suppressed, is somehow able to project that as an energy that can move objects, do things, and cause all of the phenomena we see in a poltergeist experience. How this happens, no one can ever tell you. But that's what's proposed in a lot of the poltergeist literature, that's what's happening. This young person somehow is able to do this for a period of time, then it stops. Again, that is in the cases that I've looked at and in my own research, does support that proposition. How it actually happens, absolutely no idea. One of the things though that I've noticed, and again, this is part of the cases I'll talk about, that many cases have a mix of what appears to be real stuff and hoax stuff, which makes it very frustrating for anybody to get to the bottom of what's really going on. Because as soon as somebody fakes something, then everybody goes, they faked that, everything else is written off. An understandably skeptical reaction, but unfortunately, in my experience too, some of the stuff is impossible to fake, but some of the stuff is faked. And you can understand that what happens in a lot of the cases is weird stuff starts happening. People start coming to see the weird stuff happen. Sometimes weird stuff happens, and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, there's a pressure on everybody for something to happen. Do it, do it, do it. And I guess, particularly since we're talking about young kids sometimes being at the center of this, there's pressure, pressure, pressure. You're liars, you're liars. Originally, stuff did happen. Now there's pressure for more stuff to happen. And I guess there's a big temptation to do something on demand. And I can talk about how I think that has happened in one or two of the ones that I've been involved with. But again, perfect fuel for the skeptic to write off everything. But I think that's a mistake, a real mistake. So now I haven't updated this yet, but for a while, and I still do it now actually, I was sort of keeping an eye on the international news media for poltergeist cases. This is cases that I guess match the listing of phenomena that I mentioned before. And there's an awful lot all over. Interestingly, mainly third world countries. But this might not be a good guide as to where poltergeists are active. It's only where they're actually appearing in kind of news stories that I could find. So you can see there's a lot. Africa, South Africa, Zimbabwe, pardon me, France, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. And interestingly, the majority in those places, or the majority that I was picking up in these news searches, were these cases of fire poltergeists, which are really, really interesting. So, yeah, there's a lot of cases. I'm going to talk about three that I actually personally investigated. And after my experiences in the Northern Territory in 1998, I got really interested in these cases, and I thought, okay, if one comes up that I can get to in a reasonable amount of time while it's still happening, I will. So I visited three places where there were active cases. One was in Malaysia in 2011, another one in Ho Chi Minh City, which used to be Saigon, in 2012, and I went to Turkey in 2012. Man, I was crazy. I went to Turkey, I went to the eastern part, which is the Kurdish part, which is now like full-blown civil war. And then the city I went to meet this family, they'd moved down to the border with Syria. I went to the border with Syria. I think I was nuts. So, but it was an interesting case, and I'll tell you a bit about that. But let's start with Malaysia. Malaysia was really interesting. This case was started in May 2010. This wooden house, a fire poltergeist in a wooden house, you think that would be a recipe for disaster, but the house never burned down. Weird thing number one. This house is in the northern city of Kota Bharu, which is pretty much close to the border with Thailand. In the house was a 73-year-old widow, her daughter-in-law, who was also widowed, and two grandkids. One, have a guess. 13-year-old young girl who appeared to be the focus of what was happening. What was happening between May and December? Between May and December, the case was different. Between May and December of 2010, something was cutting up their clothing, and something was interfering with the food. I mean interfering like the lady of the house, the elderly lady, would be cooking food, turn around, do something, come back to the fuel, and someone had dumped spices or a fish sauce in her. She'd just been cooking it, and something had dumped it in the sauce, a red sauce. So she was unusable. But it happened in the short time when she turned around. Towards the end of 2010, what was happening in the house changed, and suddenly fires began breaking out all over the place. It would break out on mattresses, that's a prayer mat at the top. The interesting thing was, whenever a fire broke out, they would discover it and be able to extinguish it, right? Now, that's the grandmother, that's the daughter-in-law, and that is the young girl, 13-year-old, who appeared to be the focus of everything that was happening at that house. So, and even when she went on a school excursion, and one time a jumper that she had burst into flames at school. So they got Muslim imams in to pray. After they prayed, things got worse. There were over 200 fires in that house, and in one day there was like 78 fires broke out. So I visited in 2011. So this was actually taken by a news photographer who turned up. Now, this is a Muslim country. In Muslim spirituality, the spirits there that are poltergeist-like, they call the jinn. So the jinn are the jinn are invisible creatures. I think they were created before man was created, and they can be good or they can be mischievous. So these people believe that the jinn were doing it. Now, interestingly, in Muslim theology, the jinn were created from the smokeless flame. Now, interestingly, and I'm not saying there's a link. I just thought it was kind of curious that the fire that was broke out in one of the cupboards that was taken by a news photographer who was there at the time has absolutely no smoke whatsoever. So, is it real? I went to the house, and while I was there were 2 outbreaks of fire. One was in some clothing behind a door in another room, and another one was a cushion that was on fire that they brought out to me. And I kind of had the feeling that a bit of a show was being put on for my benefit. However, in talking to the news reporter, in talking to a reporter and some neighbours, etc., I got the feeling that whilst what happened when I was there might have been staged for my benefit, possibly, that a lot of the other stuff there was hard to discredit, and it did seem like there was some genuine phenomena happening. The neighbour told me that they discovered a fire burning on a wet towel. So imagine trying to fake that. The other thing too is, this family, they were the object of a lot of local interest, but they hadn't tried to cash in on what was happening in the house. They weren't, they were a poor family, but they weren't actually charging anybody to come. They were very hospitable to me. As I said, I had a sense that a show was being put on for me, but in terms of the other elements of the case, it seemed like, again, it was that thing in some of these poltergeist cases is there appeared to be real stuff and some possibly hoax stuff. So, I don't know. I'd probably I think that was, whatever a fire poltergeist is, that was a fire poltergeist, on balance. And that was the grandmother and the young girl who seemed to be the focus of what was going on. The next case that I was involved with was really interesting, a little bit different. Remember in the first case, and another case I'll talk about in Turkey, there was other poltergeist phenomena as well as fires. In this case, it was all fires, and this was a upper middle class area in Ho Chi Minh City. Family, the father he was a senior executive in Vietnam Airlines. So this was not a poor family, this was a wealthy family. A wealthy family by any standards, I think. And starting in early 2012, this is a 3-story house, father, mother, 4 children. And again, 11-year-old girl this time. Gotcha. 11-year-old girl. So, have a look at this is a media report, and I'm just going to, I'll turn down the... Can anyone speak Vietnamese? But the fire was breaking out on lights, wall switches, and light switches, clothes, fans. They kept the fire hoses. Over 100 outbreaks. On one switch burst into flames 10 times in one day. They had the local electrical people around a couple of times, but they couldn't work out. It was nothing to do with the electricals in the house, and they checked that a few times. In May, just before I got there, the entire upstairs bedroom flamed up and was burned out. You'll actually see the ruins of the bedroom at some point in the discussion. Again, the focus seemed to be around this 11-year-old girl called Tui. And she was sent to stay with an uncle, and fires broke out at the uncle's house while she was there. So this is, I think, no, I don't think this is the father. I think this is one of the kids. Anyway, I'm not sure who this gentleman is. I'll point out when the father and the young girl appear in the image. So all of these fires breaking out, they can't work out why this is happening. It seems somehow connected to the electrical equipment. And when I went there, which was in May, that upstairs bedroom had just been burned out, and I interview the family. They're very protective of the whole. They wouldn't let me take a picture of her. They wouldn't let me do an audio tape, which I think was reasonable. Of course, I was trying to see whether they had a pyromaniac living in the house, because that was sort of my first guess, that basically someone's lighting them. They said no, no, because in some instances she'd been with them when some of the fires broke out in other parts of the house. And that's the girl there, and that's her father, just talking about it. So he was saying, no, that's not the case. That it wasn't. When I talked to her, and her English was perfect, internationally, schooled at an international school in the city, she just said, oh, sometimes I get a bit of a funny tingling feeling just before the fires break out. I can feel it. I have this sense when things are about to break out, which was interesting. None of that other poltergeist phenomena stuff happened here. There was no movement of objects or anything. It was all electrical. And again, it did seem somehow to be linked to that girl. He's a bit open mouth. I think they're telling him the story of what's going on. And of course that guy is open mouth.
So Paul, did that subside after?
Yeah, that totally faded out after I left. Just faded, nothing. No more media coverage, nothing.
No, but I mean the phenomenon itself.
Yeah, it seemed to just peter out, stopped. And that's typical with poltergeist cases too. They go for a while and they stop. Now, the next one is a real kicker. This is in Turkey in 2012. It actually went on till 2016. Again, a fire poltergeist case. But this was really interesting. Started in August 2012. And again, that's a prayer mat up on the left. Remember in the other Malaysian place there was a prayer mat with burning? And similar kinds of burns. Actually, kind of, check that out. On the top, that weird semicircular burn. Well, okay, maybe not that similar. Anyway, so, and we had fires on the walls, fires breaking out on the ceiling. A fire broke out inside a refrigerator. So what happened was, so that's a good trick. So what happened was, the family, all these fires start breaking out, and the family think, what the hell's going on? Call the fire department come, can't find anything. Eventually in the house, things keep burning. So they pile all of their stuff outside on the balcony, all of their good, everything from the house. And then the fires go out there. So they think, holy goodness, what the heck's going on? They call the district governor to help, the district governor. He comes over, big visit, big political figure comes in and brings a television cameraman, to film I'm helping this poor ravaged family. Anyway, on the way out, that cameraman, he suddenly gets a really hot feeling on the bottom of his shoe, and he takes his shoe off and finds that the whole bottom of his shoe's been burnt. And he doesn't know how the heck that happened. So, in that same city is a university. They contact the university comes out, the governor says, you've got to help these people. They bring out and they put cameras in all of the rooms. What happens next? No, cameras caught on fire. I wish, no. Absolutely nothing. Nothing happened. Or fires broke out outside of where the cameras were placed. Hoaxing? Or a very smart poltergeist? You decide. So, I visited in April 2013. I think the next, that's one of the fires that broke out on the wall. So I visited in April 2013. It had actually started back in August. And I met them at that place on the Syrian border. And interestingly, apart from the fires, they actually mentioned that a whole bunch of other stuff, weird stuff was happening. I took a translator with me, and the mother and the family said, I put a remote control down for the TV, turn to do something, come back, it's out in the middle of the garden. And plates, set the table for breakfast, turn around, do this, out, arranged in the middle of the garden. So again, the other set of phenomena was happening as well as the fires. But that case went on for about another 2 years after I left. Like, how is it possible that these fires could keep going and no one could work out why the heck it was happening. And interestingly, guess who we have in the midst of this? No, it was a good try, but you could have stuck with the 13, you'd be right. Yes.
Happy 13 for 4 years.
Yeah, it's a good point. This is Melek, which translates to angel. And this kid's straight out of Poltergeist casting. Piercing kind of eyes, and yeah, everything was happening. In fact, at her school there'd been an outbreak of fire on a jacket she'd left there. She wasn't even there at the time. But again, everything seemed to focus around her, although at one point it wasn't actually caused by her, because at one time she was sent away and the fire still happened at the house. But it did seem again like that consistent thread about, they all felt, the family felt that somehow she was the focus of what was happening. Melek, yeah, which translates to angel.
A couple of years ago, I was telling people here about a case where a gentleman contacted me, and I think he'd seen UFOs, but he said he had this strange experience where he walked out of his bedroom and every stick of furniture in the place was smashed and piled up into piles of wood, basically wood and whatever it was. And then his stepfather came home. His stepfather came home and said, "Oh my God," he must have been young at the time from memory. So he went back into his bedroom, thought, "Oh my God, he's going to think I've smashed the place up." And the stepfather came in. He heard him rattling the keys and going through the drawers, and then he left again. And the guy came out, and the place was back to normal. So just bizarre stuff like that, just weird. Yeah. I just wanted to quickly touch on Gerard Beanie. Some of you would know about him. He sells the stellar domes and the something or others that help protect your energy field from external influences, whether it's 5G or whether it's poltergeist or whatever. And he says that orgone effects can cause hauntings, and hauntings are death imprints or energy imprints of emotional charge. And he says that they then never disappear or fade over time. They're always there, and that's why you have these long-term haunted places, right? I don't know, but that's... And he says 85% of residences have them, in his experience, when he's been called out to places. A death on a property creates an emotional pain body charge that comes directly from the personal people who have died, which generates a bioplasmic radiation imprint at the exact location time of the death. I don't have a problem with that. This implant, which is an EMF field, has a very... imprint, aliens on the brain, which is an EMF field, has a very strong positive charge, much stronger than you'd expect from a smart meter. Buildings which are full of this positive charge place enormous EMF stress on the human meridian system. And this positive charge then in turn generates a geoelectric field effect in the ground, which emanates up and out of the ground and completely engulfs a building with its strong EMF charge that you cannot escape, no matter which room or level of the building you are. If that's true, it might explain why some crop circle researchers talk about where the ley lines cross when they're dowsing. They have these whirlies that go up, and around those areas, whirling energy, and around those areas there's UFO sightings, there's hauntings, strange apparitions that appear, and strange phenomena that occur too, like gravity wells and those sorts of things, you know. So he says, in addition, the geoelectric EMF field activates geoelectric grid lines in the ground, which are 2 meters wide and roughly 70 meters apart. Now, I've got a friend who used to live in the UK, and she used to douse the ley lines that went through crop formations. And she said in 1987, those lines expanded exponentially. Something strange happened everywhere she went, under the guidance of this long-term English dowser who taught her everything that he knew. He's now dead, Richard someone. But in 87 they actually expanded. So something happened then. And a lot of people talk, and this is new agey talk, right? But they've talked about around that time, that was when the new children came in, were incarnating on the planet, you know, these indigo children, whatever, which I didn't really pay much attention to at the time. I heard about it. I didn't know what to make of it really, I still don't. But then he says, then there's the problem of sleep paralysis attacks caused by a death imprint. Now that's a new thing, I'd never heard of that idea before. I know some of you have had sleep paralysis. So a paralysis attack is when you experience at night, while you're dreaming, a nightmare which is so frightening that it wakes you up. As you awake, you have the sensation of being pinned down to the bed or have a feeling of being totally paralysed, unable to move your limbs or even speak. Now, some people are more susceptible to sleep paralysis attacks than others, and not everyone recovers from a sleep paralysis attack. In fact, elderly people who live in aged care facilities can die in their sleep from these forms of attacks due to the accumulation of death prints that exist there. I guess that makes sense. The harmful positive charge from death imprints can be quite menacing and disturbing to people's emotional states and their general equilibrium. This is because the bioplasmic radiation charge has a direct effect on our meridian system, hormones and neurotransmitters.